Panzer Dragoon Saga is an interesting title. It's notorious amongst Sega fans and game collectors, but you rarely hear anyone else talk about it. The reason for its notoriety is twofold. First of all, it's one of the most unique JRPGs ever made. It also had an extremely low print run in the West, so it's got all the makings of an absurdly expensive cult classic. To add insult to injury, Saturn is a hard platform to emulate, and the game's source code was lost, which makes ports and remakes impossible. And thus the game has attained an almost mythical status on many gaming forums. The game was released in 1998 at the tail end of the Saturn's lifespan. It was developed by an internal studio at Sega called Team Andromeda, who were also behind the preceding Panzer Dragoon titles, which were all rail shooters. All of the games in the series feature dragons and a mysterious post-apocalyptic setting that's inspired by works like Dune, Hothouse, Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, and the drawings of Mobius, who even designed the cover art of the first title in the series. Saga sets itself apart from other games in the series by being an RPG, which means you can freely control your movement and explore the game world on top of your dragon as well as on foot. That's the biggest selling point of the game, as the desolate landscapes are filled with weird and abstract ruins. You get to explore them and learn about their history, whereas in previous titles, you never had time to stop and marvel at your surroundings. It's a great setup for a game. Exploring an empty and mysterious world on top of a dragon, it has the same kind of appeal as other lonely games, such as Ico, Shadow the Colossus, Metroid Prime, Another World, and Oddworld. Unfortunately, the game is held back by the Saturn hardware, whereas the previous two games were linear rail shooters, where the developers could craft each scene around the system limitations. Saga lets you explore the areas freely, so you'll run into low draw distances, pixelation, poor textures, and areas that aren't all that visually pleasing. Whereas most PS1 and even PC RPGs at the time used pre-rendered backgrounds and other trickery, Saga is fully 3D. It's a technical feat to be sure, but it also means that its graphics have aged poorly. The story starts with our main character, an Imperial soldier called Edge, getting ambushed by a group of mutineers led by a man named Crayman while working on an excavation site. Crayman is after a mysterious girl named Azel, who was discovered among all the other artifacts in sight.
Laos es a baby.
After the attack, Edge discovers a friendly dragon and decides to go after Crayman. The story centers around a power struggle between different factions who are fighting to gain hold of ancient relics, which are used for developing powerful weapons and machinery. The past is something that constantly haunts the inhabitants of this world, as most of the scattered human populace lives by gathering remnants of past civilizations who were wiped out in a big war. A lot of the story is told through FMV cutscenes, which are adequate, but not really up to the standard of Square's games. While the animation isn't always that great, the voice acting brings life to the characters and is enhanced by the fact that some of the characters talk a fictional language called Panzerese in some of the scenes.
なんだお前は。誰の許しを得てここに入ってきた。
通行証なら持ってるよ。
なんだと。一体誰が。まあいい。おおよそ察しはつく。お前を呼んだ者に伝えておけ。外との交流は不幸しか生まん。ボアズがそう言ってたとな。
While Edge isn't a mute protagonist, he's a very neutral and forgettable character, and he doesn't go through much of character development.
It's called character development. You should look into it sometime.
But that's an intentional design decision. Maybe due to the lack of memorable characters, the story never becomes convoluted, which is a good thing. You aren't dragging a motley crew of random characters you picked up along the way with you, nor do you run into any major side plots, so you never lose focus of your primary objective. In many ways, Panzer Dragoon Saga is a lot like Parasite Eve. Both are short in length, but have no filler content to pad out the experience, feature experimental gameplay, and have uncharacteristically grounded aesthetics for JRPG standards. Despite all the exotic architecture and ruins you come across on your journey, Saga feels very low-key compared to something like Final Fantasy X. The tone and mood help to set Panzer Dragoon Saga apart from its contemporary JRPG competitors as much as the dragon flying gimmick does. It's a quiet, solemn experience. You spend most of the game time alone, and the few characters you come across are very serious and don't talk much. But people aren't exaggeratedly gloomy and emotionless like in Nocturne. They act like real people would in a setting like this.
よそ者とのいざこざはごめんだよ。あっち行っとくれ。
A lot of this can be contributed to decisions made by the art director, Kentaro Yoshida, as he didn't want the game to have any characters with spiky purple haircuts and impossibly big swords. While the character models aren't exactly aiming for photorealism, they look relatively normal compared to most modern JRPGs. You can also see similar design sensibilities being used to craft some of the environments and towns in the game. Kentaro was influenced by Star Wars and how it made sci-fi feel realistic by making the world look used and dirty. The desolate and somewhat melancholic mood is often accentuated by the soundtrack that effortlessly juggles different sounds. From being mysterious when you explore ruins to pompous when fighting against massive enemy fleets. That's how the gameplay is structured as well. First you fly around exploring an area, then get into fights, and eventually end up in one of the few settlements where you can walk on foot, inspect your surroundings, talk to people, and take a break from the action. While the game is ultimately linear, it does offer some chances to explore the world on your own. As your dragon becomes more powerful, you can destroy seals discovered in previous areas, so you have to do some backtracking if you want to gain 100% completion. If you do so, you'll be rewarded with a special dragon that's more powerful. The battle system of Saga is unique. In the usual fashion, random battles happen in a separate reality from whatever area you happen to be exploring. But as you're flying on a dragon, you'll be continuously moving forward automatically. However, you can still move around in 90-degree increments to circle around your enemies, which is a must. Almost every enemy has its own weak spot, as well as devastating special attacks, which are indicated as red quarters on your radar. This brings some depth to battles and keeps you on your toes, though it can get annoying in fights against trash mobs. Like in other Panzer Dragoon games, you have two modes of attack, shooting with your firearm or targeting an enemy with homing lasers that your dragon shoots. Some enemies are immune to lasers, so you'll have to puncture their armor with bullets first and then fire a laser blast at their exposed weak spot. You can change your gun parts to toggle between different kinds of firing options, but there's only a handful of different parts available, which is kind of a missed opportunity to give more tactical depth to the battles. And as it's an RPG, you naturally get a selection of different kinds of spells. You can heal yourself, cure status effects like poison and slow, give yourself a shield to absorb heavy attacks of bosses, and you've got a wide variety of different offensive spells. but to be honest, I couldn't really tell the difference between different damage spells, and I usually use the most powerful one available. The battles are a mix of real-time and turn-based action. Much like the active time battle system in Square games, you've got 3 power meters that fill up when you're flying around. Using items, shooting, and changing gun parts consumes 1 meter, while some spells consume 2 or 3 bars of power. Moving around does not consume energy, but you also won't gain any whenever you're in a situation where an enemy can't attack you. Sadly, there's no armor or character customization in the game, as you level up automatically, but you can morph your dragon into different forms by altering its stats, of which there are 4 in total. You can drop your defense to 0 and boost your attack to 200 up from 100, and vice versa. Attack increases attack power and the rate at which you'll learn offensive spells, but increases their mana cost. Defense increases defense and the rate at which you'll learn defensive spells, but decreases your attack. Agility increases your movement speed and the rate in which your energy bars fill up, and automatically eliminates movement impairing status effects when you've filled your energy meters, but it increases the amount of damage you'll take. Spirituality increases mana regeneration and decreases the cost of spells. A balanced dragon will replenish your health when all your energy meters are full. One thing that's worth noting about combat is how cinematic some of the bigger battles are. When you're fighting against Imperial ships, there's a lot of shifting camera angles, banter between the crewmen, and things like that. While there are some fun and visually creative boss fights, I have to say that the slowness of some battles starts to get grating towards the end of the game. Same goes for random battles. When you start the game, you're enjoying the battle system so much that you don't mind. But near the end, I often found myself in a situation where I just wanted to explore by myself and not be bothered by trash fights. So, is Panzer Dragoon Saga worth all the hype? Well, for starters, the game comes on 4 discs, but only lasts about 14 hours. I myself don't mind that. In fact, I prefer more compact games, but for some that might be a negative. And, despite its short length, the designers still managed to fit in a sewer level, a monotonous, ugly, maze-like sewer level that drags on too long. To make matters worse, you're forced to ride a slow-moving hoverjet instead of your dragon. In what universe is it a good idea to force the player to explore sewers in a game where the main selling point is the ability to fly on a dragon and explore mysterious ruins?
You don't understand. I can't go down there. I hate sewers. They smell like poo gas.
I hated this section so much when I first played the game that I actually lost all motivation to continue playing. I had to force myself to get over this section after taking a break for days. But despite all my criticisms, I still recommend this game. It's one of the most unique JRPGs you'll ever play, and it will offer something to both those who love the genre and those who avoid it like the plague. It hasn't got the most well-written plot, the deepest battle system, or the prettiest graphics, but at least the first 2 are above average, and the art direction is certainly good, even if held back by the 3D capabilities of the Saturn. Even if the game fails to live up to its hype, it's an experience you won't forget. My initial reaction to this game was slight disappointment after I beat it for the first time a few years ago, but I've grown to like the experience more over time. I feel that Earthbound suffers from the same kind of hype. The combination of high price tag, uniqueness, and cult following can easily lead to unrealistic expectations. I don't think it's worth $400, but if you have a friend who owns it, or you can play it on a burned disc or an emulator, Panzer Dragoon Saga is an essential JRPG. It's not a masterpiece, but rather an excellent prototype. Much like Parasite Eve, it shows us that JRPGs don't have to be restrained by stifling conventions. With modern technology, you could make an amazing open-world game like it. As it is, it's a one-of-a-kind experience.